The dust swirled around Jack Thornton's boots as he guided his horse through the narrow canyon pass, the Arizona sun beating down mercilessly on his weathered hat. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, returning from a cattle sale in Silver Ridge, his saddlebags heavy with the money that would keep his ranch afloat for another season. The drought had been brutal this year, and every dollar counted. At 38, Jack had built his life around solitude, around the simple rhythm of working the land and tending his small herd. He'd convinced himself that loneliness was just another part of the frontier, like dust storms and cold winters. As he rounded a bend near Dead Man's Creek, he heard it. A woman's voice, weak and desperate, calling out from somewhere beyond the rocks. Jack pulled his horse to a stop, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle on his saddle. Bandits weren't uncommon in these parts, and a crying woman could be bait for an ambush. But something in that voice, something raw and genuine, made him dismount carefully and move toward the sound. He found her collapsed against a boulder, her dress torn and covered in dirt, her dark hair matted with sweat and blood. She couldn't have been more than 25, with delicate features that spoke of a life far removed from this harsh landscape. When she saw him, her eyes went wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please help me." Jack approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. Her left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and there were cuts and bruises across her exposed arms. No horse, no supplies, no water. She wouldn't have lasted another day out here. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her, already pulling his canteen from his belt. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. "Stagecoach," she managed between gulps. "Attacked. 2 days ago. Everyone else? They're dead. I ran. I fell." Jack's jaw tightened. The Crimson Canyon Gang had been terrorizing this territory for months, and the law seemed powerless to stop them. He'd heard about a stagecoach robbery, but hadn't realized it was this close to his land. "I'm going to splint that leg," he said, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "It's going to hurt." She nodded, biting her lip as he worked. To her credit, she barely made a sound, though he could see tears streaming down her face. When he finished, he lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms. "She was burning with fever. There's a line shack about 2 miles from here," he said. "I'll get you there, get that fever down, and then we'll figure out the rest." "My name is Eleanor," she whispered against his chest as he carried her to his horse. "Eleanor Ashford." "Jack Thornton," he replied, securing her in front of him on the saddle. "Hold on tight, Eleanor." "I've got you!" The ride to the line shack was agonizing, each jolt making her whimper despite her attempts at bravery. Jack found himself talking to her, telling her about his ranch, about the red rocks at sunset, about anything to keep her conscious and focused. By the time they reached the small cabin, she was drifting in and out of awareness. For 3 days, Jack tended to her like she was the most precious thing in the world. He cleaned her wounds, changed the fever-soaked cloths on her forehead, and fed her broth when she could manage it. He'd never been a praying man, but he found himself whispering desperate words to a God he wasn't sure was listening. Something about this woman, this stranger who'd stumbled into his life, had cracked open a part of his heart he thought had died years ago. On the 4th morning, Eleanor's fever finally broke. She woke to find Jack sitting beside her makeshift bed, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You stayed," she said softly. "Wasn't about to leave you," he replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "You gave me quite a scare there." As Eleanor recovered over the following weeks, a bond formed between them that neither could quite explain. She told him about her life in Boston, about the arranged marriage she'd been fleeing when the stagecoach was attacked, about parents who saw her as a commodity rather than a daughter. Jack shared stories of his own past, of the wife he'd lost to childbirth 10 years ago, of the baby who'd never taken a breath, of how he'd buried his grief in hard work and isolation. "I thought I was running toward freedom," Eleanor said one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "But I was just running. I didn't know what I wanted, only what I didn't want." "And now?" Jack asked quietly. She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and certain. Now I know. But their peace was shattered when 3 riders appeared on the horizon one afternoon. Eleanor recognized them immediately. The lead rider was Marcus Blackwood, the man her parents had promised her to, a wealthy railroad magnate with a reputation for getting what he wanted through intimidation and force. Flanking him were 2 hired guns. "Eleanor Ashford," Blackwood called out as he dismounted, his expensive suit looking absurd in the dusty ranch yard. "Your parents have been worried sick. Time to come home and honor your obligations. I'm not going anywhere with you," Eleanor said, stepping closer to Jack. "I'm exactly where I choose to be." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Jack with contempt. "You've been sheltering my fiancée, rancher. That's going to cost you." "She's not your anything," Jack said evenly, his hand resting on his gun belt. "The lady's made her choice clear." "A choice she doesn't have the right to make," Blackwood sneered. "Her father and I have a contract. She's mine, bought and paid for." Eleanor felt something surge inside her then, a strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd spent her whole life being told who she was and what she owed, being shaped and molded to fit other people's expectations. But these weeks with Jack had shown her what it meant to be seen as a whole person, valued for more than her name or her father's connections. "Take it off," she said suddenly, her voice steady and strong. She pulled at the expensive necklace around her throat, the one Blackwood had sent as a betrothal gift. "Take it off, please," Jack froze, understanding the weight of what she was asking. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry. This was Eleanor choosing to shed the last remnant of her old life, making a declaration that couldn't be undone. His fingers were gentle as he unclasped the necklace, letting the diamonds catch the light one last time before Eleanor took it and threw it at Blackwood's feet. "There's your payment," she said. "Consider your contract void. I'm not leaving and I'm not yours." "I never was." Blackwood's face went purple with rage. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll see this ranch burned to the ground." "I'll ruin you. Get off my land," Jack said, his voice like iron. "And don't come back." The 2 hired guns shifted uncomfortably, hands moving toward their weapons, but something in Jack's eyes made them hesitate. This was a man who'd survived alone in hostile territory for years, who'd faced down drought and disease and despair. He wasn't afraid of 3 men with more money than sense. After a long, tense moment, Blackwood remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "It is." They watched the 3 riders disappear into the desert. Jack turned to Eleanor, seeing her trembling slightly now that the confrontation was over. "You're really staying?" he asked, hardly daring to believe it. "If you'll have me," she replied. "I know I'm not much of a rancher, and I can barely cook. And I'm probably more trouble than I'm worth." Jack kissed her then, cutting off her words, pouring 10 years of loneliness and 3 weeks of growing love into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "Eleanor Ashford," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? For real this time? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because I love you and can't imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding was simple, held in the small church in Silver Ridge with only a handful of witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple cotton dress, so different from the silk and lace she'd grown up in, and she'd never felt more beautiful. Jack wore his Sunday best, his hands shaking as he slipped a simple gold band on her finger. In the years that followed, the Thornton Ranch grew and prospered. Eleanor proved to have a gift for breeding horses, turning a modest side business into the most respected stable in the territory. She taught herself to read the land, to understand the rhythms of the seasons, to work alongside her husband as a true partner. Jack learned to open his heart again, to laugh freely, to trust in happiness. They never heard from Marcus Blackwood again. Eleanor's parents sent one letter demanding she return. She sent it back unopened. Some bridges were meant to burn. On a warm evening 5 years after that fateful day in the canyon, Jack and Eleanor sat on their porch, watching their 3-year-old daughter chase butterflies in the yard, while Eleanor rested a hand on her swollen belly, feeling their second child kick. The sunset was painting the sky in the colors Jack had once described to her while she fought fever and fear. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked, as he sometimes did. "Giving up that life for this one?" Eleanor looked at her rough hands. Her simple dress, her modest but happy home, and then at the man beside her, the man who'd saved her life in more ways than one. "Jack Thornton," she said, taking his hand. "That wasn't my life. This is... You taught me the difference between surviving and living. You showed me what it means to be chosen, not for what you can provide, but for who you are. Every day I wake up here, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this life we've built together. That's not sacrifice. That's the greatest gift I've ever been given." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together. In the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the frontier, they'd found something precious and rare, a love built not on obligation or convenience, but on choice, on seeing each other fully, on choosing to stay when staying was hard. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and their daughter's laughter rang out across the ranch, Jack whispered a thank you to that same God he'd once doubted. Because sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, in the most unlikely places, grace arrives dusty and desperate, asking to be saved. And in the saving, you find yourself rescued too.